Hello, stress management students. Welcome to week 10 instruction. And in this week's module, what I plan to cover is stress prone personalities and stress resistant personalities. And in this first presentation, we're going to be looking specifically at the personalities that are considered to be stress prone, um, and also what the characteristics are that go along with those stress prone personalities. I posted a link within this page of the module that is entitled Learned Helplessness Assessment. And what it's going to link you to is a short article on learned helplessness and locus of control. And in fact, that link may say locus of control assessment. Either way, it's to the same thing. But you'll have a chance to, within that article, then complete an online assessment that will give you the results um, that describe whether or not you have an internal or external locus of control and how strong that locus of control is. So I'd just like to recommend that you take the time to do that assessment. It's something that we'll be talking about towards the end of this presentation, and I think you'll find it interesting. So let's go ahead and get going. Now, first of all, I wanted to make sure that everyone understands what this term means, stress prone. Stress prone personalities, if you happen to fall into a category of being a stress prone personality, that means that you're going to have an increased likelihood of experiencing stress simply because of some of the characteristics of that particular personality. Now, what I generally find when I do this coverage is that students, well, and myself also, we don't necessarily tend to fit neatly into one particular personality, whether it's stress prone or stress resistant. I know I notice myself kind of sprinkled throughout, the descriptions of the various personalities. So rather than trying to label yourself or put yourself in a box, what I'd like you to pay even closer attention to are the specific characteristics, or you could also say behavior patterns that are listed for each stress-prone personality. And I think it would be cool if you just somehow note or mark the specific characteristics that you feel like you might have within your personality. So again, stress prone, if we have these characteristics, we will they tend to increase the likelihood that we experience stress. So these are the characteristics that we really want to keep our eye on, attempt to modify, or perhaps overcome if that's possible. So, with stress prone personalities, and this information is taken from the text that I once used for this class. And this particular author in the text refers to four different personalities as being stress prone: type A, type D, codependent, and helpless hopeless. So we're just going to go through these four. And again, be making some notes if you feel like you have characteristics that fall within any of the four of these particular personalities. Now, type A personality is something that I'm thinking that a fair number of you might have heard of. Initially we just kind of talked about two different personality styles, type A and type B. Type A personality just being more driven, competitive, hostile, more impatient. And then type B being that more relaxed, laid back kind of personality. And the idea with type A and type B is that it's more so a continuum. Where do you fall, perhaps on this line? Are you strong type A, or are you kind of in the middle, or maybe you're slightly type B? So it's really not an either or kind of thing. But, let's look specifically at type A, some of these characteristics. And type A is very prevalent or very common in our society. I think as I go through these, you're probably going to start thinking of some people that you know and go, oh, wow, I think they're really type A. I think it's kind of easy to do that as we go through this chapter, but to the best of your ability, I'd like you to stay really focused on yourself and what aspects or what characteristics you might actually possess. So with type A people tend to be people who are more driven. Um, they tend to live these rushed, hurried lifestyles. Um, Type A people tend to be perfectionistic. And so, here we've already identified a couple of characteristics that might make you more stress prone. And they do fall into this type A category. But, ask yourself, how driven are you? You know, um, how rushed and how hurried is your lifestyle? And you might also ask, do you for some reason tend to thrive on that? Okay, perfectionism. Perfectionism is usually talked about as one of those personality characteristics that can make us so stress prone. Um, and it's because, within perfectionism, the expectations that we tend to set for ourselves and also for other people will be very high. It's like in an English class, it's not enough to just turn in a paper. You have to turn in the paper. So with perfectionism comes a lot of pressure. So, that's another characteristic. Time urgency, people who are farther over on this type A, toward the type A aspect of this continuum, they have more of a tendency to be really impatient, difficult time waiting. Because of this time urgency, there's much more of a tendency to multitask. Multitasking is doing more than one thing at a time. And that is definitely a stressful characteristic to have within our personalities. So some more characteristics with type A, and I think this is where it kind of gets interesting. With type A personality, there's just more of this edge of anger or hostility. You could also think all of the shades of anger. So these will tend to be more present, okay? And that is a stress emotion, and that feeling itself creates stress. Okay, so type A personality also, one of the things that's noted about type A is there's generally a tendency for people who are very type A to have lower self-esteem. And what you're going to see throughout all four of these stress-prone personalities is this common thread of low self-esteem. I think what's interesting with type A individuals is the way in which they try to bolster or build their self esteem. There's a tendency with type A people to want to prove themselves or do better, outperform others. So there's that element of being very competitive there. And by proving myself or being better than others, that somehow feeds my lower self esteem. It helps me feel better about myself. Now, self esteem, true self esteem, it's very internal. It's this kind of stable, sturdy sense of I feel good about myself. And that feeling remains no matter what the external situation might be. And so with type A personality, self-esteem's a little inside out. There's more of a reliance on building self-esteem in this external way. Okay, with type A individuals, there can sometimes be some real relationship challenges because the set of behaviors, it's not just confined to a work environment or to specific environments. It tends to flow over into other areas of life. And these characteristics can be difficult ones to navigate in relationships and for other people to navigate. Okay, a few more characteristics. People who are type A tend to use more explosive words because of their impatience. They'll tend to hop in and finish the sentences of other people because, they're impatient and you're not speaking fast enough. So I'm going to help you finish what you want to say. And there's more of a tendency to raise their voices. So it's, a little more of an aggressive speech pattern in general. Um, this next one, it says manipulative control. Type A people tend to be more ego driven. There's that strong desire to control or influence the environment and other people. That competitive nature can really shine through in this area of trying to one up others. Maybe you got an A on your last exam. Guess what? I got an A on my last three exams. So there sometimes is more of this one upping or this attempt to prove that I am better than you. And here's another aspect of type A personality. Type A people sometimes there's sometimes this overemphasis on left brain analytical functions. So there may be left brain, the left hemisphere of our brain, we usually think of it as being that organized, logical, kind of black and white critical thinking realm of the brain. And so it can be a little tougher if we're extremely type A to see the gray areas. There'll be more of a tendency to look at just cause and effect, um, to look at things in this real linear type of pattern versus looking maybe at the bigger picture and all of the shades of gray that might exist in a situation, in a work environment or in a relationship. And type A people also tend to really value that type of analytical thinking. Now, I mentioned that type A tends to be very prevalent or very common in our society. And it is. And what I think is kind of unfortunate is we actually tend to encourage it. Our society at large is a very competitive one, and we place high value on being competitive. I think probably that we place a lot more value on being competitive versus cooperative. In some situations in our society, we do kind of move into this seeing people as numbers and forgetting the humanity, and I'm just thinking about right now with the whole COVID thing going on. Um, we're looking at people more so as data, how what percent are infected. There's this tendency for us to sometimes place numerical value on things like even human life. Um, in our society, we tend to really value and place a lot of emphasis on how much stuff you have, that's material wealth. Also, we tend to really value accomplishment. How much have you done? How much have you accomplished? And I'm hoping with this you can kind of hear that really driven quality that's somewhat embedded in our society. And then also, we're really moving into a society and an age and an era, where we've gotten very accustomed to immediate gratification. We don't really have to wait on things the way that we used to. And so, with that movement towards being able to get immediate answers, immediate feedback, immediate results, etc., um, I think that with that process, we kind of are losing the opportunity to practice what I think is a really important skill, patience. So these are just several ways that our society tends to encourage type A behavior. And finally, last slide on type A personality. The research on type A goes back to the early 60s. And it was first noted because researchers were looking at the potential causes of, this says CHD, that's coronary heart disease. And in their research, trying to identify risk factors, what actually causes coronary heart disease. I'm going to jump on down here, and I've got this in bold and some of it underlined. Research revealed that type A behavior was a greater predictor of heart disease than all other risk factors combined. That's what they were finding, back in the 60s. Originally, type A behavior or type A personality was just referred to as hurry sickness. Okay. Now, with further research, what they were able to do was to determine, well, is there a particular aspect of type A behavior that is maybe the most dangerous to us physically, or the one that potentially really increases the risk of coronary heart disease? And yeah, with some of the research that's been done, um, what they're thinking is the most relevant factor with regard to increased risk for coronary heart disease is um, that element of hostility and aggression. So, that kind of angry edge that can sometimes be present with type A personality. And once again, we talked about self-esteem with type A's, how a lot of their self-esteem is derived or comes from being better than others or proving themselves to others. Um, their self-worth, which self-worth is related to self-esteem. Um, it is also really tied up in how others perceive them. So once again, those things like self-esteem and self-worth that we want to be just really internally based and not dependent on what others think or what we do externally. With type A's, it tends to be a little inside out. How I feel about myself and the degree to which I think I have worth, it's becomes too related to comparisons with other people and how others are perceiving me. So that's our first stress-prone personality grouping. And again, make sure and just make note. What do you think you have a dose of when it comes to type A? Are you a person that is more impatient, that feels hurried and rushed? Do you know that you tend to be more competitive? And for some reason, it's real important for you to outperform others. Are you perfectionistic? So, yeah. So let's look at the second one. The second one is something called type D personality. And, there wasn't a lot in the text about this particular personality. So I went online and tried to find more about type D or depression prone personality. And, I did this a couple of years ago, really looked around a lot, and there just really wasn't much. But the author of the text included this personality. Depression prone, what this is saying is that actually people who are more prone or who are more likely to experience some challenges with depression are also going to be more stress prone, more likely to experience stress. So, I think this is an important connection to make, an important thing to understand. Um, I was really looking for, well, can you give me more information on this? Is there a particular characteristic that is involved with someone who's maybe more prone to stress that happens to be also more depression prone? And the only thing that I found, and there was limited research on this, but I could actually really understand how this might be the case. Some of the research was talking about how people are more depression prone tend to have higher levels of interpersonal sensitivity. And I can understand how this particular characteristic could be involved in making us more depression prone, and also how it could make us more prone to experiencing stress. So high interpersonal sensitivity just means, wow, I'm a little more likely to experience that ouch, that feeling of being hurt by something that happens or things that people have said, or maybe just more sensitive to feeling rejected or critiqued. It could be a lot of things. And, with sensitivity, I think I may have mentioned this. I'm not sure. I may have mentioned it in a previous lecture. I think it's one of those personality characteristics that is, I have a huge appreciation for sensitivity. I think sensitivity has the potential to make people just beautiful human beings and wonderful people, but it can be one of those personality characteristics that is a bit like a double-edged sword. While it can help us in many ways and it can add to, our beauty, our internal beauty as a person, I think we have to learn to take really good care of our sensitivity, because if we're more sensitive, it does mean we're going to be more likely to experience a lot of different emotions and maybe experience those emotions more intensely. So that is type D personality. Now, this third one, we're moving out of letters, and we're just moving into something that's called codependent personality. And in my classes, it does seem that most people have heard the term codependent, or they've heard of codependency. And I think what's really interesting is that this gets listed as one of the 4 stress-prone personality characteristics. And what I've done is, in this kind of orange or gold kind of color, I've highlighted some of the things that I think are, bigger characteristics that go along with codependency. And so I'm going to primarily hit on those. Um, Individuals who are codependent, well, first of all, self-esteem is going to be lower. Again, with the stress-prone personalities, the common thread with all 4 of them is lower self-esteem. And because of this, Individuals who are codependent um, become more dependent on pleasing people. So, and I think you guys can probably really relate to this. If you are a people pleaser, oh my gosh, this can be exhausting and highly stressful. So, people pleasing, being more driven, or really being more driven to need to please people. So that being something that it's almost like it's kind of wired into you and you can't help it. You just really feel like you need to please people. Another thing that's very common with codependent personality is that there can be a tendency to thrive or to somewhat even enjoy being in the midst of crisis, and also really thrive on getting to manage the crisis or attempting to fix the crisis. Now, the degree to which someone is aware that they might actually be enjoying that, I think that can really vary. But there is a need that's being met, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So, with with codependency, what might happen, or with codependent personality, is I find myself more frequently in situations where there's a lot of unrest or there's drama. And if I really look at myself, I might notice that that's a bit of a pattern for me. Um, and really, what's going on is that for some reason, I'm kind of attracted to that. Um, there's something about that meets a need that I have. With codependency, there is also more of this victim mentality. Why do these things always happen to me? Okay, so, and that may be spoken outwardly or it may not be. It may be more just a feeling. And then this other one with codependency, there tends to be a strong need to be needed. Okay, this is how I get my fix. In other words, I have lower self-esteem. And so the way that I feed my self-esteem is by placing myself in situations, or I'm just kind of drawn to these situations where I'm going to feel needed, because it's through feeling needed that my self-esteem um, gets bolstered, gets supported. So this is that need that I was talking about up here. One of the ways that I can end up feeling really needed is if I enter into situations where there's more of a crisis going on, there's more drama, or it could just be that I think something needs to be fixed, or someone maybe needs to be fixed up. So I can find myself a lot of times with codependency involved in these relationships that are not very healthy. Maybe I'm actually more attracted to people who have some challenges or problems, because in in those situations I am going to get my fix. I'm going to feel needed. The chances of me actually being attracted or drawn to someone who is really a healthy individual, um, that chance is going to be lower, because I'm not going to get my fix in this healthy relationship with someone else who you know is doing okay in life. So codependency is actually considered an addictive personality because of this. This idea that, I need to somehow get my fix in order to support my self esteem. and my fix is being needed or feeling needed. So, and this says, at some point you realize you can't really save them. And, with codependency, that's another example that's given a lot is the example of being a rescuer or a person who's fixing people somehow. And so I think this is kind of a cool one to think about with yourself. Are you, for some reason, more drawn to people who seem to have problems? Are you more attracted to situations that are a bit messy? And really thinking about, well, is it because when I am in those situations, I end up feeling needed, and that helps me feel better about myself somehow. So, but yeah, these things are considered to be stress prone types of characteristics and behaviors. We're going to find ourselves experiencing more stress in life. So the bottom line, once again, with codependency is we're going to get validation of our self-worth or a boost also with our self-esteem um, if we get our fix. So, if we feel needed by others or needed within a situation. All right, so the fourth and final stress-prone personality is referred to as helpless, hopeless personality. And that link that I left for you to, I think it was locus of control or learned helplessness questionnaire, but it's just above this lecture. This is where that your results from that quiz kind of or that assessment come into play. Um, Helpless hopeless personality actually it comes out of something called the theory of learned helplessness. And the theory of learned helplessness, some of you may have discussed this in a psychology class. This theory was identified by a person named Martin Seligman. And I don't know if any of you will think that name sounds familiar, but ironically, he is also the person who's done all the research on optimism. And also, another one of his areas of research now is happiness, flourishing, authentic happiness. So, he started though, kind of his early days were more in this area though, identifying learned helplessness. Um, so the description of this personality goes something like this. With learned helplessness, it's felt that for some people, if they experience failure enough times, they actually then somewhat learn to fail. So, if I've experienced failure quite a lot, what I may end up doing is just kind of assuming that I'll fail and that there's nothing I can do about it, and so I'm not even going to try. And that, in a nutshell, is kind of how learned helplessness can work. And we'll just move forward because I think this second and third slides are it's going to kind of bring things home a little better, help you understand it a little better. Some of the characteristics of helpless, hopeless personality, um, they're very related to learned helplessness. If I really feel that no matter what I do, I'm just not gonna, I'm not gonna be able to do it. It doesn't matter how hard I try, I'll just fail. If that's really kind of how I feel, I'm gonna have very poor self-motivation. Why work at things? Because I'll just fail. Also, with helpless hopeless personality, there is cognitive distortion. Cognitive distortion, what that means is the way you think is distorted. And we talked about how thinking patterns get distorted with loneliness. And so here, there's the same type of thing happening. There's a distorted type of thinking, and that distortion is you just assume that you will fail. So again, why try? Poor self-motivation. Also, with helpless, hopeless personality, um, it talks about here emotional dysfunction. There's going to be more of a tendency to experience feelings that are related to sadness or maybe even depression. And then this last characteristic is some of you that have taken that quiz will maybe have an understanding of this term. It says external locus of control. So people with helpless, hopeless personality, it doesn't matter if they succeed or if they fail. They're going to think the causes of success or failure are related somehow to something external. It could just be that they got lucky, so hey, I got an A on my math test. A person with external locus of control is going to be more inclined to say, I just got lucky, or the teacher was generous, or it could be the task wasn't very hard. In other words, it's not about them, how hard they worked, or maybe their own intelligence or whatever. It's external. And that was a success. The same thing happens with failure. If I fail that exam, it's not about me either. It's about the teacher wasn't fair, or the questions were tricky. Um, I coached a lot of years, and I saw this a lot with athletes. I really noticed how they attributed their success and failure. Did they attribute success externally? Did they attribute their failure somehow externally? And so, I have the umpire down here, or it could be I missed that fly ball in the outfield because it was a really sunny day and the sun was in my eyes. So this is, I think, just kind of a really interesting group of characteristics. And, again, think to some degree, do you notice any hint of this within yourself? And, we're not looking at this to judge ourselves. We're looking at this stuff to help us understand how having these characteristics can actually mean we experience more stress. Okay, so just two more slides. And, what is locus of control? Um, a locus of control orientation is a belief about whether the outcomes of our actions are contingent on what we do. That's an internal control orientation. Or on events outside our personal control. That's an external. So again, here's this continuum, internal to external locus of control. It's not a box, again. All of us are going to fall somewhere along this continuum. If you did that assessment, you may have found out you had a strong internal locus of control or a moderate internal locus of control. It's going to tell you where you're closer to and how the strength of that. But let's just look at this. Individuals with a, a locus of control that is more internal are going to tend to feel this way. I control my destiny. Individuals who have a more external locus of control are more inclined to think and feel this way. Others control my destiny. So over here, this is I make life happen. Over here is life happens to me. And do you hear that helplessness? Life happens to me. Yeah. All right. So finally, how do you attribute your success and failure? Again, this is about successes and failures. If you're more internal, you're going to talk about the successes and failures being related to your efforts, your actions, and your abilities. And if you have a more internal locus of control, you're going to believe that you're in control of the outcomes in your life. In other words, I make things happen. If you have a more external locus of control, you're going to believe that your successes and failures are related to external things like luck, fate, timing, other people, and you tend to believe that outside influences control the things that happen in your personal life. So, you know, it's more like this: things happen to me. And again, hear that helplessness. So, I hope that this lecture was interesting, hope it made sense, and that you were able to look at it and identify if you feel like any of the personality characteristics that you have um, maybe making life a bit more stressful for you. Again, these are things that the first step is becoming aware of it. So hopefully, if you hadn't taken that first step, you now have and you're aware. And so I think the thing from this point on is really paying attention, seeing how it operates in your life, what's causing it to come up for you, and then creating some strategies for modifying or minimizing that behavior. And in doing that type of thing, what's going to happen is you're going to decrease stress. Okay, so really hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon.